exclusive preview of the animated prologue from Studio GigX.
Key to all manner of medicines, curing you.
Oh my god! No! Please don't do this to
You
me!
and Grandfather are doing your best. I'm just as happy to spend time with you here while you both research.
I'll handle this. Just wait here. I'll be back. I promise.
How's it going, gamers? I hope you're doing well, because I'm not. As you saw from the prior footage, I actually went to Anime Expo and I got to see the Shadow the Hedgehog panel. Now everything was fine and dandy until I flew back to Australia and the airline lost my luggage. So as of now, I have no idea where my limited edition Bocchi the Rock Ryo Yamada t-shirt is that I got in Japan, my Hypeland Shadow the Hedgehog t-shirt plus the Hot Topic Shadow the Hedgehog pants and Rouge and Shadow friendship bracelets are also missing, and on top of that, my Persona 5 Royal Steelbook that I got signed at Anime Expo by Joker, Ryuji, Futaba, and Akechi is also nowhere to be found. I am simply one bad day away from committing suicide, guys. But you know what, let's focus on the positives. At the end of the day, I did get to see the Shadow the Hedgehog panel, and it was fantastic. So let me talk about some of the more notable parts of the panel. First of all, Kirk Thornton literally admitted that he knew nothing about Shadow until recently. Which, I mean, fair. This is not like Shadow's character was very relevant within the newer games. Whenever Shadow appeared in a newer game, he was just there to be there, or he was Boom Shadow, which was completely different. But this also meant there was a lack of understanding of Shadow the Hedgehog from Kirk Thornton's end, and there was a lack of voice direction because the actual writing had no depth. I remember early on, especially after Sonic Generations, everyone really hated Kirk Thornton's Shadow. But nowadays, especially after the LEGO commercial, everyone's kind of digging Kirk Thornton now. It really goes to show that to have a good performance, you also need a really good script. And while I don't like Sonic Frontiers' script or Sonic's performance in Sonic Frontiers, definitely having improved dialogue also helped Sonic's performance, even if I still don't like him, because there are still a group of people who ended up liking his performance in that game. And while I don't like Roger's voice as Sonic, I do like his actual performance, the way he enunciates words, how he performed in Frontiers. Another interesting tidbit we learned is that Shadow is not inspired by Vegeta from Dragon Ball Z. And it's funny how people are pointing to this one concept art piece which lists Vegeta as one of the key words when designing Shadow, and using that as proof that Shadow is inspired by Vegeta, but he really isn't, guys. Now, I haven't actually watched Dragon Ball Z, but I asked my friend who has, and he says that the similarities kind of end at Vegeta being a villain at the start and then growing to be a rival. That's literally it. Shadow actually has reasons and trauma to want to destroy the world, while Vegeta is kind of described as a bully. On top of that, Shadow has this entire backstory where his girlfriend was killed, and Vegeta doesn't have something like that apparently. He's just evil because he's part of an evil civilization, I think. I'm not too sure. And I think it kind of sucks that Vegeta is the most cited inspiration for Shadow the Hedgehog. Maybe he is an inspiration, but he's a very minor inspiration for Shadow the Hedgehog. Because the biggest inspirations for Shadow the Hedgehog are two very prominent figures in literature. The first is Jesus Christ from the Bible, and the second is Rin from a manga called Please Save My Earth. Rin is literally Shadow the Hedgehog. He has a tragic backstory about a girl that he couldn't get with because she died or something. He was observing Earth from outer space. There's like talks about destroying the moon. Literally the only reason why anyone compares Shadow to Vegeta is because firstly Dragon Ball is mainstream, and Sonic already had some Dragon Ball inspirations in the past, so they just kind of saw a pattern that wasn't really there. Rin is straight up just a stronger inspiration for Shadow the Hedgehog, and it's very obvious, and Shiro Maekawa has even gone to state that Please Save My Earth was a big inspiration for Sonic Adventure 2 as a story. I am also unironically certain that Jesus Christ was a big inspiration for Shadow 2 somehow. People have made observations that Shadow sacrificing himself at the end of Sonic Adventure 2 is like Jesus being crucified, which I don't 100% agree with, but it did make me think about it. I was just browsing YouTube at the gym when I came across a Japanalysis video. It's called Japan Takes Cringe Names to the Next Level. And in that video, they just casually mentioned that Mary was the English version of the name Maria. So in English we have the Virgin Mary, while in Japanese we have Zero Sexu Maria. So if we align Shadow as Jesus Christ and Maria as the Virgin Mary and Professor Gerald Robotnik as God, I think it kind of works, guys. Obviously, Sonic Adventure 2 isn't a one-to-one retelling of Jesus' story. Instead, it's kind of like a warped, evil, twisted version of the Bible. While Shadow and Maria's relationship was modeled after a guy crushing on a girl in Please Save My Earth, Maria also kind of acts like a moral compass for Shadow. She's kind of like his mother figure, I guess, teaching him right from wrong. They kind of actually expand upon this in Sonic Battle, where they claim that Shadow was given a soul similar to Maria, so I guess it's kind of like a cloned Maria soul. So if you clone yourself and you consider that clone your son, I guess if you clone your soul, you might be able to consider that soul your son as well. Okay, but where Shadow's story deviates from Jesus Christ himself is that Shadow obviously tries to destroy the world. Shadow's like a failed Jesus. He's meant to create miracles, he's meant to cure diseases, while Jesus, the real Jesus, is just like kind of out there casually doing that stuff. And I guess when the time came for Jesus to be crucified, or Shadow to be crucified, it was Maria who took the first fall. She was shot down by a gun soldier, but it was ultimately Gerald Robotnik, who was playing God, that got crucified. He was put on a, well, I guess not a cross, but he was strapped to a chair and then executed by firing squad while being recorded. That recording was played all around the world for everyone to see, similar to how Jesus' crucifixion was performed publicly. You can also draw parallels to how Shadow was in stasis for 50 years to how Jesus, after he died, he was like kept in like a cave for 3 days. But because Shadow never actually died, he has to die at the end of Adventure 2 to fulfill kind of that prophecy, that role he has to play as Jesus in the modern day. All of humanity was really messing up during Sonic Adventure 2. They really genuinely believed that Sonic was the enemy, and then you pair that with the sinister past of Gun, and humanity's just like full of sin. So in a way, Gerald, assuming the role of God, tried to cause another mass extinction, just like God has actually done in the Bible as well. But this time there's no Noah's Ark. That Ark is also getting destroyed. So because of humanity's sins, they've been sentenced to death by God, and Shadow has to sacrifice himself to save humanity. So it kind of ends up in like a Jesus versus God situation, which is pretty interesting. Then we have games beyond Sonic Adventure 2 like Shadow the Hedgehog, which could be inspired by that story where Jesus is tempted by Satan to do bad, to do evil, to do misdeeds. Shadow's game doesn't really as strongly tie into the Bible, but it's still there with the biblical inspirations. I'm pretty sure Shadow was inspired by Constantine to some extent, so you know, demons, fighting demons and stuff. I mean, demons are in the Bible probably. And of course there are these lingering aspects about Shadow as well, such as the German advertising for Sonic Adventure 2 where they have Sonic as kind of representing heaven and Shadow as representing hell. We also have the Shadow Renaissance art piece, which was done for IDW, which was inspired by the Fallen Angel painting. And even more recently we have Shadow's wings that give off this demonic vibe to him. The symbolism unfortunately isn't as strong anymore, but they're still going for this heaven-hell biblical aura. And I'm not gonna lie, after playing Persona 5, I think using religious figures for modern day storytelling is like the coolest thing ever. And the Sonic franchise would continue to do this, most notably in Sonic 06, where characters and demons are taken straight from the Quran. But yeah, that's my TED Talk about Shadow being inspired by Jesus Christ. I talk about Please Save My Earth more, but it's been like a year since I watched the OVA, and I don't really remember too much of it. Plus, if you watch the anime or read the manga yourself, you'd notice the similarities between SA2 and Please Save My Earth like immediately. So I wouldn't feel like I'd have anything to add, but with the Jesus Christ comparisons, I don't think anyone has talked about it as deeply as I just did, so I said something original, isn't that cool? Shifting focus back to the panel though, we got some animators from Studio Gigax who are doing the animation prologue for Sonic X Shadow Generations. And man, they got me hyped. They were really taking this project seriously. They talked about the psychology of Shadow the Hedgehog, they were looking into what makes him tick, how he would react to certain situations, and adding that to the animation. I really dislike how Shadow the Hedgehog is associated closely with the word edgy. I guess he is edgy, but the word edgy has a negative connotation to it. And because Shadow the Hedgehog had one bad game, he's been associated with this word, even though Sonic Adventure 2, Sonic Heroes, and Sonic 06 were like very well done portrayals of him as a character. So when the animators at Studio Gigax were really taking taking the psychology of Shadow the Hedgehog seriously that genuinely made me happy. Because Shadow the Hedgehog is edgy, but he's edgy with purpose. He has a whole ass backstory that Shiro Maekawa took into account when writing the character. His sole purpose was to cure humanity of all diseases, and when the research for that was really going nowhere, he started questioning his purpose. But not only that, he became best friends with the girl that his creator wanted to cure, and she was unfortunately murdered before he could even do that. And he's lived his entire life on the space station. He's never been to Earth. He's never really experienced freedom. So his rage and anger does come from somewhere. He's not just an edgy caricature. Then of course in Shadow the Hedgehog, because he has amnesia and his only memory is of Maria getting shot, that makes up like 10% of his memories. 10% of his life is trauma. But enough of that, let's talk about the actual animation preview, which is shaping up to be the best 2D Sonic animation so far. It's kind of crazy, but when Maria hugged Shadow, everyone was cheering at the panel. And it's not surprising because we haven't actually seen Maria and Shadow touch each other in any intimate way before. Maybe there's been something in the Archie comics, but this is the first time we've seen it canonically. The sound design is also really cool. In the panel, they said they were paying attention to how these sounds should sound like. And the first explosion is very muffled, and it makes sense because they're behind like really protective glass and they're in outer space. So it really adds to that immersion. This teaser is also really perfect for Sonic fans because at first you might think it's Gun raiding the Ark, but then you realize it's freaking a Merle, or at least a Gizoid of some sort. We always knew that Gerald was researching Gizoids, but we never saw Shadow's backstory in the Gizoids clash. So this is such a validating moment for people who really care about Sonic lore. Then when the Gizoid flies towards Gerald Robotnik, it looks like this super anime laser beam. And I'm telling you guys, Ufotable, they've got to stop wasting their talent on Demon Slayer and work on a Sonic project. Because this 1.5 minute Sonic animation has more emotional depth than any episode of Demon Slayer ever could. Okay, that's my daily hating Demon Slayer out of the way. And then when Maria grabs Shadow's hand, he sees this premonition of Gun raiding the Ark, just like how I saw a premonition of me losing my luggage. I'm not joking. On the plane when I was sleeping, I had a dream that I lost the luggage because of woke. But this perfectly establishes that Shadow is actually having a flashback, and it makes you ask, will this actually lead into the Gun raid? Because the next part is so cool. The door opens by itself, kind of signaling Shadow to leave Maria, and of course Maria is begging Shadow to help Gerald, but the premonition he saw implies that leaving Maria would put her in danger. And the way this shot is framed, it's a long shot of Shadow and Maria as the door opens behind them. The world is calling for Shadow to leave Maria in danger. And while past Shadow didn't know that at the time, us as Sonic fans, we know it. We know the disaster that's about to occur, and modern Shadow, who's reliving this experience, knows this as well, although it's at the back of his mind because all of his future memories have been pushed back. Then as Shadow leaves, we see all the explosions behind Maria, and then she becomes a simple silhouette. And as Shadow runs through the hallway, the lights behind him start shutting off, as he's cutting his connection from Maria as her future starts to darken. Again, implying that Shadow leaving Maria might actually put her in danger. I've said this before, but the classic Sonic games made me fall in love with visual storytelling. And this is visual storytelling at its peak. It's not some silly, what does the red curtain represent? It's something that everyone can easily understand. And even if you didn't consciously notice it, I'm sure everyone subconsciously noticed it. Then we have some really close cuts of Gerald and the Gizoid, which is something anime does a lot, and Studio Gigax did explain that they took a lot of inspiration from Evangelion. The word Gigax actually kind of reminds me of the word Gainax, so that's pretty funny. Studio Gainax made Evangelion, if you didn't know. And for a franchise like Sonic the Hedgehog, where people have been complaining it's for little children, taking inspiration from a work as influential and mature as Evangelion really warms my heart. And the music actually went so hard. It gave the atmosphere this extra oomph, this extra emotional push. It would genuinely be a missed opportunity if they didn't show this in a cinema. Genuinely, Sega and Paramount, listen to me. At the end of Sonic 3, the movie, play all 3 prologue animations. It would literally be life-changing. So even if the movie ends up being mid, you would get a little taste of peak right at the end. I will say one thing though, is that Maria's first line felt a bit iffy in terms of her performance. The actress also said that she was considering how Maria was sick as part of her performance. The first line felt a little too slow, but maybe that was intentional to show how she's kind of weak. But then the rest of her dialogue felt a lot more natural. Maybe you could say her adrenaline shot up so she could speak faster. The voice actress also played Xena in Sonic Lost World and she was fine in that, so maybe again it was an intentional thing. We'll see when the full thing drops. Also, when Shadow punches the floor at the beginning, the punch sound effect sounded a little too loud. It kind of overshadowed Shadow's dialogue a bit. So he says, "to curing you," but then I only heard "curing you." And when Shadow's running in the dark, you don't really see the lights of his air shoes in the dark. It's actually fully blacked out, and I felt that was really weird. But honestly, those are the only complaints I have with the animation. The rest is phenomenal. One thing others seem to not like is the fact that the animation looks kind of 3D. Like, there's less 2D stylization for Shadow, and he looks like he's really on 3D model in the 2D art, but that's really up to personal preference. I think the fact that they can make it look 3D when it's actually 2D animation is also kind of impressive. And while I do prefer the 2D stylization, I'm not going to complain. It's still good in its own way. If any of the animation actually turned out to be 3D, I'd be genuinely impressed, because it does look 2D. Except for when Shadow runs through the hallway, that's obviously 3D, but it looks better than any 3D Demon Slayer did, that's for sure. Yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about the panel. It was surreal seeing Azuka in person, I'm not gonna lie. I think I saw Katie as well, but she was wearing a mask, and I saw Jasmine and Ivo Gerskovich as well. Like, it's just surreal seeing these guys in person. But before this video ends, let me leave you a message from Shadow the Hedgehog himself.
Hey, this is Shadow the Hedgehog, the ultimate life form. I am all of me. And for everyone listening out there, I encourage you to be all of you, no matter where you are, no matter what you're doing. Always be all of you.